few of you sent me a link to a creator named Embree and a video he recently posted about potential informants for the Idaho 4 murders. Based on what he said, something sounds funky. No doubt. I think it's very possible for the male in the pair, there's a man and a woman, and I'm not going to name them, and I'll explain why in a second. There's something up with at least the man in the couple. He has an extensive past with pushing certain products, and he seems to walk free quite a bit, or charges are dropped. Something's funky. I do think it's possible one or both of them are an informant, just not for this case. Now, what I really want to touch on is, informants are kept confidential for a reason. And even, Steve said in his messages to Brett Norton that the FBI stepped in. When Steve found out there was an informant, he wanted to reach out to them, and the FBI stepped in and made it very clear he wasn't to do that for a reason. Informants are kept confidential, and they're kept away from the public eye and anybody involved with the case, because law enforcement does not want them to get spooked. They also don't want them to be killed. So they're kept private and confidential for a reason. And let's say these two are informants for a case. I think naming them I think it's really reckless. I think and very dangerous, because that puts a target on their back. It does. Now, I'm not saying that these two are squeaky clean. They're not. But imagine people hearing this news and thinking, oh, these two might be informants. Okay, I've got to take care of them. And then something happening. And then we find out they're not informants. I'm all for speculation about this case. Clearly, I draw the line at implicating people by name without any kind of credible source material, evidence, data, something. And that's always been my stance on this. As far as who the informant is, here's what I find odd. So we know from the PCA that the DoorDash driver went to law enforcement. They reached out to law enforcement. And I say they because we don't know. Is it a man or a woman? We don't know. And the way it has been put to us, the DoorDash driver was cleared. But here's what I find very odd. None of the press releases that have a list of names of people that police don't believe are involved, none of them have the DoorDasher. And if you Google for any news about the DoorDasher and whether or not they were cleared, you can't find anything. The one thing I found was from the Idaho Statesman, and that's behind a paywall. And I couldn't find anything, which is immediately suspect to me. Because we know he was around, we know he was in the area. I'm saying he, forgive me. We know they were in the area, because it very well could have been a woman. So it's very possible that they caught something on a dash cam, or they're an eyewitness to something. So if I had to guess about the identity of the informant, I would say my first suggestion would be the DoorDash driver. Now here's something else I find a little suspect, and might be related to the topic of the informant. I find it very strange how there's been nothing attributed, no quotes, no statements, nothing attributed to Bethany Funk. And I've said from the very beginning, her lack of presence in that PCA was immediately stuck out to me. And we know that the defense wanted to interview her because they believe she had exculpatory evidence. And again, please keep in mind that things are said by the defense and by the prosecution to create a narrative. That doesn't necessarily mean that she saw something that negates what Dylan saw. You know, when they say, well, we believe she has exculpatory evidence, that's just to make it seem like, hey, we think they have the wrong guy. That's their job. But I do think it's interesting to me. It's interesting to me, at least, that so much, and I realize it's because Dylan saw him. So, of course, Dylan's going to be mentioned more in the PCA, but I do wonder if this is a strategy. Did they intentionally throw her under the bus, meaning Dylan, so that nobody would be talking about harassing, trying to contact Bethany? See, my feeling is Dylan's taking the heat for other people. And I don't mean other people involved with the crime. I mean, it just seems like there are certain people being intentionally shielded. You know, like I just said, the DoorDash driver and Bethany. Now, the only window Bethany had in her room was the one facing out. There was no windows looking out to the side of the house. So part of me wonders, I've always felt that he parked behind the house. That just made the most sense. But maybe he didn't. And I do, you know, there's that news about, that leak about Bethany seeing somebody in their underwear. Is that true? I have to say, you know, after everything with these messages, I'm starting to wonder if anything that Steve told Brett Norton was accurate. And I don't mean that Steve lied. I don't think Steve lied. I do think now somebody trolled him. Because why else? I mean, the prosecution and the defense, they had nothing to say about these messages, about this supposed leak. And so one of the things that he learned, and it's not clear, did he hear it from the grand jury? Did he hear it before that? Actually, he had to have heard it before, because the news of this leaked in May in the Mirror. And that was before the grand jury indictment. So that information had to come from somebody else. But as far as those messages go, and the grand jury leak, I think somebody trolled Steve. See, I was part of a live a few days ago on TikTok, and somebody said, well, why wouldn't, like, if Bethany saw something, why wouldn't they include it? And I said, because probably whatever Dylan saw was enough. You know, they just needed to get the arrest warrant. And now I'm wondering, is it because she saw him? Like, is it because she saw him leave that house? I mean, I don't... Something in the way they're shielding Bethany has sort of sent up a lot of red flags for me. Do you think Bethany has exculpatory evidence? And if so, what do you think it is? Or do you think she saw something that actually puts Brian Kohberger in the house the night of the murders? If you had to guess who the informant was, who do you think it'd be? Leave it in the comments.